Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Software Engineering. I'm Zhang Shuang from Software College, Northeastern University. In the previous lectures, we have studied the concept of requirements and how to capture requirements. Well, in this lecture, we are going to discuss the requirements challenges. Well, although software requirement is so important for the success of the target software system, we must admit that it is very difficult to achieve proper requirements for the target software system. Why? First, because of the knowledge and techniques of the developers. Most developers learn computer and software technique in school, and they are not good at communicating with users. Maybe they are good at design or good at coding, but they are not good at communicating. But you have to understand that requirements really need a lot of communicating, a lot of interviews, right? Yes. And developers cannot achieve proper requirement documentation. That means they are not good at writing. Maybe they are good at writing code, but they are not good at writing documentations. And many developers lack domain knowledge. What does it mean? Well, surely our developers have the knowledge of computer and software, but the domain, that means the problem that the target software is trying to solve, that domain knowledge is really something new for our developers. Okay. For example, the development team is trying to develop a library management system, but the developers has never worked in any libraries. And maybe the target software is just a finance system, and our student has nothing to do with finance before, right? So one of the biggest problems is that many developers lack the domain knowledge. And what's more, there are also some problems with the users. Sometimes the user cannot describe their requirements. Well, okay, so let's read this sentence together. I know you believe you understood what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. Well, it is really a confusing sentence. Well, actually, it's just a sentence by the Vice President of USA. So you see that sometimes even a Vice President cannot express himself correctly, cannot make himself understood. Well, you will see that at least that the user should be familiar with their own business, with his own works. And then he should be able to describe their business logic, business requirements exactly, clearly. Let's take another example. All of us know our own feet very well. Okay? You know our feet is part of our body. But can you describe your feet's size and shape exactly? How big is it, or how fat is it? So we all have the experience that if we want to buy a pair of new shoes, we must go to the shoe shops personally and try the shoes to make sure that we can buy the right shoes, okay, for our feet. So you can see that sometimes people cannot describe exactly and clearly what they are very familiar with. Okay? Sometimes something is beyond the words. And sometimes both the developers and the client users misunderstand each other. One more example. If I stand here and ask who can help me to change a 100 RMB note, mostly I will get no response. Okay? It doesn't because that you wouldn't like to help me. It is because that you don't know what I want exactly. Because for this question, for this requirement, there be many options. And you are not sure which option I want. or 10 RMB notes, or 250 RMB notes, and so on, right? So what is asked for is not what is really needed sometimes, and the answer is not what is really asked. And because of different knowledge background, sometimes the user will misunderstand developer's suggest or reply. Okay. For example, if the developer is discussing something about advertisement on information highway, are you sure that the users will understand it exactly? Maybe not. Maybe they don't understand exactly what is information highway. And what's worse, user changes requirements often. You should never hope that the requirements will just changeless. No, it will never happen. That means the user will change their requirements. Okay, so let's take a case. Manager Huang is in charge of the development of a securities trading analyzing system for a foundation investment company. He and his team has been developing the software system at the client's location for almost a year. Now, the deadline of the project was near, but it seems hopeless to close the project. The users will always supply new requirements. The trading manager often told Manager Huang his new ideas and required the development team to optimize the system functions. The project seemed endless. Manager Huang asked for closing the project, but the clients thought the completed system did not meet their requirements and postponed the acceptance testing. They required the development team to improve the system. Manager Huang checked the project contract. There were no requirement details inside. And then, new national investment rules were published, according to which the completed system needed modification. Surely this would take quite a lot of time and work, but it seems to be within the contract scope. It is obvious that Manager Huang really got some problem with the client and users. Okay? So, thinking, what is the problem? And how can Manager Huang complete the project successfully in the end? Okay, well, this is an interesting case, and you are supposed to think and discuss it after class. And employees of the client organization feel threatened by computerization. Of course, the employees understand that the target software system will improve work efficiency. That means the organization will need less staff, less employees. And then, if the target software system is available, and maybe some employees will be fired, will lose their jobs, right? So some employees are not happy with the target software system. So it will be very difficult for developers to interact, to talk, or to collect the requirements from the unhappy employees. They won't cooperate very well. So this is one of the difficulties. Okay? Well, requirements team members must be able to negotiate, and the client's needs may have to be scaled down. Sometimes the client is very smart, and they are asking for as much requirements as possible. And sometimes they are asking something unreasonable, unachievable, and so on. That means the requirement team members must make clear about the requirement scope, okay, to make sure that the clients won't want more requirements, more than necessary. Okay? And to make sure that the development team won't accept additional requirements. So sometimes negotiation between the developers and client users will be very important. Well, key employees of the client organization may not have the time for essential in-depth discussions. We must understand that it is client who will pay for the target software system. And the key members of the client organization will have the last word. And of course, the key employees have the clearest idea about the target software system. So it is really essential that the developers should have an in-depth discussion with the key members, although they are very busy. The developers should still have to manage to have the essential discussion with the key employees. So let's see one more case. Manager Zhang is a project manager of a software development department of an information technology company. 6 months ago, he began to take charge of the development of a finance management information system of Xindongli Training Corporation. Manager Zhang has taken charge of quite some finance management projects and achieved a quite ripe finance management software product. So he thought only some second development would lead the project to success. So Manager Zhang confidently led his development team into the client's location. Because Manager Zhang and his team were so experienced that they finished the development in 3 months. The project was supposed to enter the acceptance testing phase. But Finance Manager Chen of Xindongli thought it's impossible to achieve such a complex finance system in only 3 months. He said Xindongli had never experienced so fast development. He refused to sign the acceptance certificate. He required Manager Liu and other staff of finance department to check the business requirements and to test the software system carefully and strictly. So the staff did. Testing proved that the software system was basically correct, but it is difficult to deploy because business flow was always changing. 1 more month passed in this way. Manager Chen thought that the software system has not considered the organization leaders' requirements. So it is difficult to deploy. Manager Chen required the development team to deploy the software system for headquarters and the sub-companies one by one. Manager Zhang agreed and began to deploy. But after 2 months, the deployment was still unsuccessful. Information Center of Xindongli couldn't buy the needed server because it was not on plan. Staff of finance department said, since it could not be spread even in the headquarters, it should not be spread anymore. Manager Zhang was very distressed. Nearly half a year passed. The project seemed endless, let alone benefit. This project seems so unhappy. Well, let's think. How can Manager Zhang complete the project successfully? Okay, so this is one more case that you are supposed to think and discuss after class. So, we should never forget testing during requirements. So far, we have understood that testing includes both execution-based testing and non-execution-based testing. And the product of requirements phase is requirements documentation, and surely it will need non-execution-based testing. Of course, the aim of testing is try to establish the client's real needs. Only get the client's real needs, it is possible to achieve proper targeted software in the future. And if there is rapid prototype, and the developers should make sure that the user interact thoroughly with the rapid prototype to make them interact and to make them feel and to make them think about it. Okay. And all kinds of issues must reach client. That means new requirements or new modification or new strategy and so on. Finally, metrics for requirements documentation. Okay. Since the requirement documentation needs testing, how to judge whether the requirement documentation is proper or not? First, the requirements documentation must be correct. We cannot imagine to develop a target software based on incorrect requirements, right? Okay. Next, clarity. That means the requirement documentation should make the requirements clear. The description for the business requirements and logic should be clear, easy for everyone to understand. So this is clarity. Unambiguous. That means the requirements, for both the functional requirements and non-functional requirements should get the same understanding for everyone who reads the documents. Okay. For example, if there is such a description in the documentation, like the target software system should be able to respond quickly. How is it? Well, surely different people will have different understanding for quickly. Maybe some people think to respond in 30 seconds will be quick, okay? And some think in 15 seconds will be quick, okay? So, such a description is not okay. It is too ambiguous. You should make it exact. How fast will the system respond? Okay, let's say the system should be able to respond in 20 seconds for each request. Well, that will be fine. Next, consistent. That means the things and the descriptions of the business logic should be the same throughout requirement documentation. Surely the requirement documentation will be quite long. Okay? Some is very long. Okay? And there are so many business logic inside. And maybe some business logic is just the interface between function and modules. And then it is very important that the business description for this function is exactly the same, even though it is mentioned in different parts. So that is consistent. Completed. Remember that step 2 for requirements collection is to record the result of each requirements collecting. Right? And that is very important reference for future requirements documentation. So that means the requirement documentation should cover all the issues that has discussed between the developers and the user and clients. So that means no missing. Okay. So that is completed. Traceable. Well, just like the completed, okay, the requirements documentation should be based on the requirements records. And there should not be such kind of requirements in requirements documentation that has not been recorded in the requirements records. That means if this issue has not been discussed between the developers and the client users, it should not be inside the requirement documentation. So that means traceable. Necessary. Necessary means just enough. That means just enough requirements to solve the client and user's problem. That means no additional functionalities. Because additional functionalities won't get more funds from the clients. And what's more, as long as this business logic is within the requirements documentation, and although it is additional, although it has not given by the users, it will be the developer's responsibility to design it, to implement it, to test and integrate, and to maintain it. Okay? So that means more functionality, more cost, okay? More responsibility. So that means just enough. Realism. That means achievable. The requirements, okay, should be achievable. That means should be able to be implemented. It is beyond the current technique. It should not be the requirements because it cannot be achieved. Next, verifiable. That means the requirements should be able to be tested. If the requirements cannot be tested, it is meaningless. Right? Okay. And finally, we should never forget that requirement documentation is trying to answer the question of what, but not how. So that means the requirement documentation just answer what the client really needs, but it won't answer how to solve the problem for the client and users. So that means never change the requirement documentation into design document. Okay, so much for this lecture. Thank you.